Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Reducing Chemical Harm for Healthier People and Planet. I am Dr. Barbara Malkus, Board President for Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I am pleased to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Arlene Blum. Arlene Blum, PhD, biophysical chemist, author, and mountaineer, is Executive Director of the Green Science Policy Institute and Research Associate in Chemistry at UC Berkeley. The Institute's scientific research and policy work with government and business has reduced the use of classes of harmful chemicals, including flame retardants and fluorinated chemicals in consumer products worldwide. Dr. Blum received her BS in chemistry from Reed College, her PhD in biophysical chemistry from UC Berkeley, and has taught at UC Berkeley, Stanford University, and Wellesley College. Blum's awards include being included in Forbes Sustainability Leaders 50 Global Changemakers list in 2024, receiving an honorary doctorate from the University of San Francisco in 2022, induction into the California Hall of Fame, and selection as one of the world's 100 most inspiring women. And I can say she is an inspiration for me. More information can be found at greensciencepolicy.org and arleneblum.com. Dr. Blum, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here and getting to speak with you and other supporters of your very important organization. So let me start. Let's see, so if I click here, there we go. Reducing chemical harm, healthier people and planet. So we are the Green Science Policy Institute, and we do scientific research. We work hard to communicate our papers widely, and in fact, we have a lot of our papers will have tens of thousands of downloads because they're on topics that are important to people's health, and they have had a lot of impact. We bring together people from business, government, academics, and the NGO community at retreats to come up with strategies to change government policy and to change business purchasing and manufacturing towards reduced toxics and healthier people and planet. So I started my career at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. This is when I was my freshman chemistry lab, and my professor was a wonderful young woman who was 23 and had a doctorate in chemistry from MIT. Highly unusual in those days, particularly, and she was so enthusiastic about chemistry that all 4 girls in our class got doctorates in chemistry. I also started mountain climbing at Reed College and ended up climbing mountains all over the world. So my story of working on chemicals began when a climbing colleague of mine actually fell to his death on a high peak in India. And I wanted to do something for the world in his memory. He was an early environmentalist. And so I went to a professor named Bruce Ames, who had a screening test for whether chemicals cause cancer. And I said, what can I do in the memory of Bruce, who died climbing, to make the world healthier? And he said, why don't you look at flame retardants in kids' pajamas? This was way back in the 70s, nearly half a century ago. Well, half a century ago, my goodness. And he told me there was a flame retardant called brominated tris in all American kids' pajamas, and it was up to 10% of the weight of the fabric. And he was worried that it would change DNA and possibly cause cancer. So we actually did some studies, and we found a little girl whose mom had bought all her pajamas in the UK, and so she hadn't had tris pajamas. So we put her in the tris pajamas, and the first day she wore them, we found tris in her urine. And every day she wore the pajamas, there were more tris breakdown products in her urine. So the chemicals were going from the pajamas into the child. And then we ran a screen to see if this chemical tris changed DNA. And it was a very strong mutagen, which indicated it was a likely carcinogen. So we thought, oh my goodness, we have to tell the parents of America that their babies are wearing pajamas that could have cancer-causing chemicals. And then I got invited to this mountain. And this is Mount Everest. And at that point, no American woman had even tried to climb Mount Everest. So I had this terrible decision. Did I go try to be the first American woman to climb Mount Everest, or did I stay here and tell parents of America about the cancer-causing chemical in their children's pajamas? And I decided I would do both. So I went to Mount Everest, and as I was climbing up steep ice faces and going through the Great Coombe, this is at 21,000 feet on Everest, every night I got to my tent and I wrote my paper about the flame retardants in kids' pajamas. And this is my high point on Everest. I'm at 24,500 feet. It was an altitude record for an American woman at that time. And my flag there had 2 petri dishes. This was the petri dish without tris, and there are few colonies. And then this petri dish had tris, and there were a lot of mutations and a lot of colonies. So from my high point, I sent my paper by mail runner to base camp, to Kathmandu, and it went back to America, and it was published as a lead article in Science magazine back in 1977. And you can see the title, Flame Retardant Additives as Possible Cancer Hazards. And the subtitle, The Main Flame Retardant in Children's Pajamas is a Mutagen and should not be used. And that's a really strong statement for a scientific paper where we'd done a couple of experiments. As people know who read scientific papers, most of them end with the same recommendation, which is more study is needed, a very safe recommendation. And here we came out and said that this chemical should not be used. And the reason I put this title in is because this is really the basis of the work of our institute, the Green Science Policy Institute. We do scientific research that can have impact, and then we make recommendations and we follow through. And I'm going to be giving you examples. So when this paper came out, Bruce Ames, who was a visionary, got us on the 3 morning TV shows, Good Morning America, the Today Show, and I forgot the third one. But we were on, those days, everybody watched the same media. We were on the 3 morning shows, and every parent in America knew that there was a problem with their kids' pajamas. And that was January of 1977. 3 months later, only 3 months, in April, tris-treated garments were banned by the US Consumer Product Safety Commission. And that's what happens when everybody sees the same media and believes the same things. It's very powerful. So tris was banned, brominated tris. And I went to buy a bunch of pajamas just to check. And it turns out it had been replaced by chlorinated tris, almost the same, similar in structure, function, and unfortunately, looking like it also was a mutagen and could cause cancer. And we did more studies, and chlorinated tris was also removed from pajamas a year later. However, what I didn't know then is it continued to be used in many other products, including our furniture. And if anyone has furniture that you bought before 2012 or so, it may well have chlorinated tris or even a worse flame retardant in it. So more about that later. So after climbing Everest, our team was successful. We were the second Americans to climb Everest. At that point, all the highest peaks in the world, 8,000-meter peaks, there's 15 of them, had been climbed by men, and not a single woman had climbed an 8,000-meter peak. And I thought it was time to give women an opportunity to climb high peaks. So on my way back from Everest, I got a permit for Annapurna 1, which is the world's 10th highest mountain. And we indeed were successful in climbing it. We were the first Americans and the first women. I wrote a book called Annapurna, A Woman's Place, about our ascent, in case anyone would like to know more. I don't have time to say more today. And I spent a year writing Annapurna, A Woman's Place. And then someone said, why don't you write a book about how you got to Annapurna, which seemed unlikely because I was raised by very conservative grandparents who wouldn't let me do things like ride horses or go to the beach. And how did I end up leading the first American ascent of Annapurna, which has been said to be the most difficult and the most dangerous, with the highest fatality rate of the world's high mountains. So that seemed unlikely. So I ended up spending 20 years writing Breaking Trail, A Climbing Life. I wanted to call it Mountains and Molecules because it's about adventures both in the mountains, but also adventures in science. And those are the adventures I'm going to be talking with you about today. So the problem is cancer that your organization cares about. And this is a very interesting document showing the share of the population versus cancer versus the gross product per capita. And if you look along the lower axis, you have income, and the upper is percent of the population with cancer. So the United States has the highest population of people with cancer of any country in the world. Now, maybe our reporting is better, and that's part of it, but we still have a lot. Canada does, and we're high income. And you look at the countries with high income, and they tend to have the highest amount of cancer, while low-income countries tend to not have so much cancer, partly reporting, but we believe that it's exposure to cancer-causing chemicals. And if we want to reduce the cancer, we want to reduce that exposure. And so many resources go into treating cancer, but we think it's so much more humane and cost-effective to prevent cancer. So what is the problem? There are more than 80,000 chemicals on the market today, and most of them we don't know a lot about. It takes a long time to do research, discover a chemical is harmful, and regulate it. And then what happens? If you look at the chemical on the left, it's decaether, and this is used or was used in the plastic around televisions, other electronics products, textiles, and it was found to be persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. And deca means 10, so it's 10 bromines around an ether. That's an ether bond. And so decaether has been phased out, but as the sales of the decaether have gone down, the sales have gone up of the decaethane. Again, 10 bromines, and this is an ethane bond instead of an ether bond. The chemical industry said to manufacturers when the decaether was phased out, don't worry, we have a substitute. It's very similar in structure and function, and it's great. We don't know much about the toxicity, but it's probably fine. Do you think it's fine? So of course it isn't. Decaethane on the right is equally persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic, perhaps more so. So our old TVs, the plastic could be 15% by weight, the decaether. Our new TVs, it could be the decaethane. And this is what's called a regrettable substitute. So there are tens of thousands of individual chemicals. And as I said, it takes a long time to evaluate just one chemical, find an alternative, and the alternative is often very similar and similarly toxic. So what can you do about it? So we came up with the idea of thinking about chemicals in families or classes that have similar structure, function, and toxicity. And at our very first, we called them toxic reduction retreats. At our very first toxic reduction retreat, we came up with the idea that there were 6 classes or families that contain the majority of the harmful chemicals in everyday products. And today we're going to be speaking about 3 of those classes, PFAS, fluorinated chemicals, antimicrobials, and flame retardants. If you want to learn more, go to 6classes.org and you can watch a 4-minute video. And in each of the videos, you learn a lot more about the class of chemicals, where it's used, why it's harmful, how to reduce your exposure, and a success story, because we found people watch these and they get very upset to learn that there are these there's a general belief that the government's protecting us from harmful chemicals, but unfortunately it's not true. These classes of chemicals are in many, many of our products, but if we know where they are, we can reduce our exposure. So there's 6 videos in an introduction, 7 videos, 28 minutes. So in half an hour, you can learn a lot about harmful chemicals and reducing your exposure. So we're going to talk today about the halogens. If you remember your chemistry, the periodic table, there they are, fluorine, chlorine, and bromine. And the reason halogens are problematic is the organohalogens. That means fluorine, chlorine, and bromine bonded to carbon. They're not natural in any mammals, and our bodies don't know how to deal with them. And so these halogens are like stealth invaders, and they go into our cells and they stay there a long time and they cause trouble. And this is an interesting paper from Environmental Science and Technology that explains it more. It's about efflux transporters, and they're the things that are on our cells that keep the toxics out, and if they sneak in, they throw them out. They're the cellular bouncers that keep toxicants out of cells. But chemicals like the halogens, which aren't natural to our biochemistry, sneak in. And I love the quote on the right, how this paper began. It says, cells are like nightclubs. They have to make sure that bad individuals, those who might disrupt the nightclub, stay out. To that end, both nightclubs and cells employ bouncers to prevent unwanted characters from entering. For nightclubs, the undesirable characters could be drunks. For cells, the undesirable characters are noxious chemicals, i.e. organohalogens. So, did I just go the wrong way? Okay, I guess I just reviewed the classes. So we're going to start talking about flame retardants. When I started working on flame retardants, all the papers, the scientists would begin by saying flame retardants are essential to save lives, and then they would talk about how harmful they are to so many of our biological systems. But we came to learn that they don't necessarily save lives. And an example is all our furniture used to have a label saying Technical Bulletin 117, the required furniture foam to withstand a small flame for 12 seconds. That's the foam inside the furniture. But it turns out if, say there's a candle on your couch and it falls over, the fabric burns first. You have a big flame, and then the foam burns almost immediately, and with a lot more smoke and toxic gases. So actually, this is a flammability standard that does not provide a fire safety benefit. So the chemical that was used to meet this standard was the chemical, it's called a pentabrominated diphenyl ether. And these were used in our furniture to meet the standard. It was a California standard, but it was the only flammability standard for furniture. So all the furniture in North America was made to meet this standard. So if you look at this structure, it turns out it's halfway between a PCB, which is a known carcinogen, and a dioxin, another carcinogen. So this is not a great structure. And this chemical was up to 5% of the weight of the foam in pretty much all the furniture, baby products, and auto foam used in the United States and Canada. And it's a very problematic chemical. The chemicals come out of the foam, they go into air, drop into dust, they end up in food and water, we inhale them, we ingest them. And because pretty much all the furniture foam, car foam, children's product foam contained by weight 5% this toxic chemical for all those years, penta-BDE in all of us. And what is the harm? The most vulnerable are pregnant women. It increases the difficulty getting pregnant. It alters thyroid hormones during critical windows of brain development. So children, if the mothers have higher levels of penta, they have lower birth weight, various neurological problems, and numerous human epi studies have shown a loss of 3 to 5 IQ points in the average American child from the penta that had been in their furniture foam. This has translated to billions of dollars of lost productivity in our country because the average IQ of people in the US has shifted downward by 3 to 5 IQ points. That means, fewer really smart people, more people who need help. And you see that in orange. And the other, a recent study comparing people with the highest levels of penta in their bodies, and everybody has it, that people with the highest levels have a 4-fold increase in cancer. Chemicals are carcinogen and a neurotoxin. And so this is across our whole population. We've lost intelligence and increased cancer. Since everybody has it in their bodies, it's maybe not the reason for cancer, but it certainly is contributing. So we started in California when I came back to science. I had a long break from science, climbing mountains, raising a family. I actually took 26 years off, which I write about in Breaking Trail, my memoir. And I came back and I thought, how can I do anything, again, useful? Maybe I can work in a lab, because I hadn't done science for 26 years. And then I learned that the same tris we'd gotten out of kids' pajamas was used in our furniture. And that's because it was replacing penta, the really bad one. I came back to science in 2006, just when penta was being phased out. So I thought, let's have legislation here in California to stop the use of these flame retardants. And we determined that you could stop fires better in the fabric rather than filling the foam, the chemicals, with flame retardants. So we had 4 different bills in California, and they all failed because there was huge campaigns by the chemical producers. They called themselves Californians for Fire Safety, but it was the 3 companies that made the flame retardants. And indeed, a journalist documented in the beginning, I was working for free. I was just back trying to start doing something about flame retardants. I remembered how harmful they were. And the chemical industry spent a documented $26 million in Sacramento. And this was, for example, a mailer that went out to everyone in the state of California, stopping legislation that would have increased fire safety without the use of flame retardants. So we wrote scientific papers. This was one with Heather Stapleton from Duke, where we looked at 100 baby products, and 85 of them contained harmful flame retardants. Many of them contained tris, the same chemical that was in kids' pajamas. There was a baby changing mat, I remember, that was 15% by weight tris. Breastfeeding pillows with organic cotton covers had cancer-causing chemicals inside. This paper got a lot of attention. It was the #1 paper of the year in environmental science and technology. We talked to the industry. The furniture industry had no idea how harmful the chemicals were, and they came out in support, saying that the risk associated with the use of the chemicals was greater than the hazard associated from furniture without flame retardants. And the thing that made all the difference is we'd had 4 bills, and they all had been defeated due to this huge amount of lobbying and spending by the flame retardant industry. But some great Pulitzer Prize winning reporters from the Chicago Tribune came to one of these crazy hearings where unfortunately the legislators were paid a lot of money, and they all voted along with the flame retardant industry. Anyway, they did a lot of research and did this series of 10 cover stories on the Chicago Tribune, Playing with Fire. And the subtitle of the first story says it all. A deceptive campaign by industry brought toxic flame retardants into our homes and into our bodies, and the chemicals don't even work as promised. And this Tribune story made such a difference. They came in second for the Pulitzer. And Jerry Brown, who was our governor then, was able to change the standard. So there was a new standard that could increase fire safety without flame retardants by stopping fires in the fabric before they reached the foam. So there was no need for flame retardants in the foam. And the furniture industry, the foam industry, they were all really glad not to have to be required to use the flame retardants. And there was a labeling requirement. You can see that furniture required a label, and there was checked, contains flame retardants, doesn't. And since then, it's been required that all furniture in California and eventually in the US not contain flame retardants. So this changed about, well, it was called Technical Bulletin 117-2013. It started to change in 2013, but it really took till 2015. So if you have furniture since 2015, almost for sure there won't be flame retardants. There should be a label somewhere on the bottom saying it does not contain flame retardants. Unfortunately, if you have furniture since before that, it might contain chlorinated tris, or even if it's from before 2004, it might contain penta. And you might consider replacing the foam in your furniture with new foam that would not contain any. So this was a big victory for public health. Every home with new furniture is healthier. There's still an environmental justice issue that, students, low-income people could have old furniture with those chemicals. So what are we working on now? So unfortunately, motor vehicles with foam still has these chemicals. There's a federal flammability standard that was passed in 1970 with no research that leads to a requirement for flame retardants in the foam in our cars. There's no proven fire safety benefit. Anyone who gets in a car is exposed. It's good to open the windows and air out your car. We did a study with the Stapleton Lab at Duke, measuring the flame retardants in 101 US vehicles from 22 brands, all the brands. All of them had forms of tris, the same chemical that had been in the kids' pajamas. We found them in the air and in the seat foam, and most of them are known carcinogens and neurotoxins. So changing this 1970 unproven standard is really tough. We've partnered with Consumer Reports, who really cares about healthy cars and good cars, and the International Association of Firefighters, two great partners. We've had a petition to the agency. It's called NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Authority, and they have not responded to our petition. They're supposed to. We're trying to have a meeting with them. So with the support of Consumer Reports and the firefighters, we're trying to change this standard. Given the current political situation in Washington, D.C., I'm not too optimistic at the moment, but it's a long, slow process. So we are persevering in trying to change this. And so we can have, just like now, our furniture doesn't have unnecessary flame retardants. We would like the same thing in our cars. A second flame retardant project is that well, let's go back, the black plastic spatula that everybody's worried about because they're flame retardants, and the solution is to throw away the flame retardants. Well, the solution actually should be not to throw away not to throw away the spatula, but to not put flame retardants in black plastic. And that's the reason they're flame retardants in the spatula, because they're used in electronics plastic, like the TVs having the deca ether or decaethane that I talked about in the beginning. So an example is e-bikes are being used a lot now, and there have been lots of fatal battery fires. And so they've made a standard for e-bikes that's good to make them batteries safer and healthier. And most of the standard is good, but unfortunately the standard is requiring flame retardants in the plastic around lithium-ion batteries. And flame retardants in the plastic won't do any good, because by the time a lithium-ion battery is running away, the fire is so explosive that all the flame retardants will do is increase the soot, smoke, toxic gases, make the fire more dangerous, and increase our chemical exposure. Once you put flame retardants in plastic, it's out of the circular economy, or if you put it in the circular economy, you end up with the black plastic spatula with flame retardants. So we're working to try to change, have standards for lithium-ion batteries that increase fire safety without the unnecessary use of flame retardants. So those are two of our current projects. A lot of our energy now is going into antimicrobials. They're used in many, many products where they're not needed. They're mostly there for marketing purposes. For example, soap and water is actually more effective, believe it or not, in washing your hands than soap with antimicrobials. So here's a statement from the Food and Drug Administration. There isn't evidence to show that over-the-counter antibacterial soaps are better at preventing illness than washing with plain soap and water. And there's a recent review article looking at many, many studies and concluding that plain soap and water is actually better than antimicrobial soap. Additionally, many antimicrobial cleaners and disinfectants are connected to health harm and antibacterial resistance, which is a huge problem. A lot of building materials have antimicrobials in them, but there's no evidence that they reduce infections or increase health harm. So, here's another quote from the Center for Disease Control. Cleaning with soap removes most types of harmful germs like viruses, bacteria, parasites, or fungi. Studies have not found any added health benefit from using antimicrobial soap. The ingredients may not be safe and may contribute to antibiotic resistance. So why do we have antibacterials in our soap? Just for marketing purposes. So back in 2016, 22 different antimicrobials were allowed in soaps. And given the fact that there was no benefit and a serious potential for harm, the FDA wanted to ban all 22, so soap would not have any antimicrobials. But the manufacturers of 3 of them made a big case that they could prove that theirs were beneficial and not harmful. And so the FDA agreed to defer rulemaking for 1 year on these 3 ingredients used in soaps. And they're called benzalkonium chloride, or BZK, or BAC. We're going to talk more about them later. Benzethonium chloride and chloroxylenol. The top 2 are what are called quaternary ammonium compounds, and the bottom one is an organohalogen. You remember about organohalogens. And they said in 1 year they could develop and submit new safety and effectiveness data. Well, that was 2016. It's 2025. Guess which chemicals are being heavily used in everyday products that we use. There are connections to cancer from these chemicals. The benzalkonium chloride is a mimic of estrogen, and research is ongoing on whether it indeed, like estrogen, can contribute to cancer. It's been linked to inflammatory bowel disease associated colon cancer. And people with cancer are more likely to get infected by antimicrobial resistant bacteria. And the use of these chemicals leads to more antimicrobial resistant bacteria. So there are cancer concerns from these chemicals. Where are they used? Here we have it. Dial soap, antibacterial. Soft soap, antibacterial. They both contain benzalkonium chloride. And there's no benefit. It's better to use dial soap and soft soap without antibacterial. And I believe they do have versions without it, but most of what's sold, I know every time I go to an Airbnb, they have antibacterial soft soap, and I'm like, oh dear. Soap and water cleans your hands, and it doesn't kill the bacteria on your hands, which are good to have. And it doesn't go out into the wash water and then end up harming. They're very ecotoxic, the benzalkonium chloride. So they don't do anything for washing your hands, but they go out into the world and they're very harmful to almost all creatures. They're particularly harmful to mitochondria. They concentrate 100-fold in mitochondria, and those are the energy powerhouses of our cells, and they harm them. Us and all the plants and creatures that get exposed. So an interesting slide, my current favorite picture I took at Safeway. And why is this my current favorite picture? Because if you look at Dawn, many people like Dawn, right? It was used for washing birds after an oil spill. And you look, this was at Safeway. our local grocery. On the top shelf, you see Dawn Ultra, and it says, 50% less scrubbing. In small print, it says Dawn dishwashing liquid, and it's a fine product. But on the shelf below, you see Dawn antimicrobial, and it also says dishwashing liquid, 50% less scrubbing. It's in the aisle with all the dishwashing liquid, but is Dawn antimicrobial a dishwashing liquid? So if you blow up the label below where it says antimicrobial, or if you look at it in your store, in very small letters, it says Dawn chloroxylenol. Remember, that's one of the 3 chemicals allowed in hand soap. And then it says antibacterial hand soap. So why are they calling this Dawn antibacterial hand soap? It's because chloroxylenol is allowed in hand soap. However, if chloroxylenol is in any other product, such as dish soap, it is regulated by the EPA as a pesticide, and there's strict requirements that Dawn apparently does not want to meet. So they label chloroxylenol as and it says on every one of those, the apple and the orange flavor, the green ones and the orange ones down below, it says in very small letters, and you'll see it below antibacterial, chloroxylenol antibacterial hand soap. So this is the first time I've shown anyone this slide, and I hope in the Q&A, I really would love to hear what people think about this. And, Dawn seems to me a good product, and it seems like that why do they have to have an antibacterial one that isn't more effective, is possibly less effective, and have to label it as hand soap, which doesn't seem like what a good product should be doing. So anyway, I'd be interested in people's thoughts about this. So we've been working with the FDA to try to get them to make a decision after 9 years. And we had Senator Blumenthal and Cory Booker wrote them a letter asking them to go ahead and make a decision. And they wrote back and said as long as the manufacturers were giving them data, they would keep it open. So it didn't seem like much was happening with the FDA. So it seems like a good time to do something in California. So we have a bill in California, Assembly Bill 916, the Safer Soap Act, to stop the use of the 3 antimicrobials in consumer soaps. And if this were to pass in California, all over the country, that they're not going to have a different kind of Dawn or a different kind of soft soap for California. So that would stop the use of these antimicrobials. There would be no antimicrobials in consumer hand soap and body wash, and that would be a good thing. As we said, that these chemicals have a potential for health harm, increase antimicrobial resistance, are harmful to mitochondria, and there's no benefit. So I am just about out of time, so I'm going to rush really through PFAS because I think we've heard about PFAS before in this series. But these are the forever chemicals because of the very strong bonds between carbon and fluorine. Again, they're organohalogens, not natural to our biochemistry, and they're very harmful to so many body systems and cancer-causing. So I first learned about them trekking in the Himalayas, reading a great book, Stain-Resistant, Nonstick, Waterproof, and Lethal. This was back in 2013. I came back and Googled, and there was nothing written about them except scientific papers. So I reached out to the scientific community, to leading scientists, and said, let's have a call and talk what can be done about PFAS. And all the scientists I reached out to wanted to talk about them because they were all worried and nobody really knew about them. So we started these calls in 2013, our monthly, and we have them the first Wednesday of the month. And they're people you might know, like Laura Shader, who works for Silent Spring, and they're a bunch of Massachusetts people. Anyway, so we've been talking now for 12 years, and a lot of good science has come out of this. 2015, we issued a statement signed by several hundred scientists on stopping the use of PFAS, developing safer non-fluorinated alternatives, We got a lot of press, including a cover story about the lawyer, Rob Bilott. We wrote a number of papers. This was one that had, I don't know, 80,000 downloads, showing that you could trace back from PFAS in drinking water to military bases, airports. But cleaning up PFAS is expensive, problematic, and it's much better to prevent it by keeping it out of products. And this is what we worked on for a number of years. We've switched now because it's so great. So many people are working on PFAS that we're working on flame retardants and antimicrobials, as I told you. But I'll just give you, to end on an optimistic note, some really good changes on PFAS. There are companies like Keen that wanted all our 6 classes out of their shoes, and they looked and they found PFAS in 101 places, and 70 places they weren't necessary. They're water shoes. Why do you need PFAS? And it took years of work, but they found replacements. And Keen are out of all PFAS, and they wrote a green paper to help other companies get out of PFAS. We wrote a paper on fluorinated compounds in fast food packaging that introduced the idea that there was PFAS in a lot of food packaging, and we publicized it. Senator Blumenthal wrote letters, this is back in 2017, to Burger King and the other McDonald's, and we heard later from McDonald's, it was when they read about our paper and got the letter from Senator Blumenthal, who got no answers to his letters, but McDonald's said they started looking for alternatives and found them, and by about 2020 they were out of PFAS in their fast food wrappers. And indeed, there was a whole process here of food packaging bans, beginning with Washington State just a year after our paper. The country of Denmark banned it in 2019. And finally, in 2024, the US FDA banned PFAS in food packaging. We looked and saw that the major source of PFAS for children was in carpeting. And so we decided to see if we could get the carpet industry to stop using PFAS. And we have our Material Buyers Club, which is big companies and Harvard who buy a lot of carpeting, and their carpeting was PFAS free. So they wrote the carpet manufacturers to come to a meeting that we had in Berkeley to learn more about PFAS in carpets. And so the whole carpet industry came to Berkeley, and it's an amazing story. You can read about it on our website. And one day they committed in 2018 to stop using PFAS in carpets. And we knew that it was successful when Home Depot announced that they were going to stop. Took 2 years. By 2020, they stopped selling rugs and carpets containing PFAS. And our meeting was scientists explaining how harmful PFAS was, and that going from the long chain to the short chain PFAS didn't solve the problem. And their customers, their big customers, saying, we don't want PFAS. And they finally, the carpet industry got way ahead of regulation and did stop using PFAS. A last success was cosmetics. We wrote a paper, and we, that doesn't mean just our institute, we've collaborated with really great scientists, Graham Peasley at Notre Dame, Marta Venier at Indiana University, Miriam Diamond at the University of Toronto, Heather Stapleton at Duke. We're working with really good scientists. But we found that there was, we studied about 500 cosmetics products, and about half of them had PFAS, particularly waterproof mascara, shiny foundation, shiny liquid lipstick. And let me go back to that one and just say the day our paper went online, we had legislation proposed in both the US House and the Senate, the No PFAS in Cosmetics Act. And they were bipartisan in the House and the Senate. And we had a big press conference where people like Senator Blumenthal and Debbie Dingell told the cosmetics industry to get out of PFAS. They had, thanks to Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, we'd invited the cosmetics industry to the press conference, and they all heard they needed to stop using PFAS, and they did start looking for alternatives. And then the next year, in 2022, California passed the PFAS-Free Cosmetics Act, banning PFAS from being intentionally added to beauty and personal care products sold in California. Other states have bans, and they're effective at the end of 2024. So PFAS is out of cosmetics. Another place, we wrote a paper finding PFAS in North American school uniforms. 20% of kids wear school uniforms in the US, a lot of low-income kids, and we tested 10 stain-resistant uniforms. They all contain PFAS. We published the paper and ES&T, and again, legislation to ban, passed in California to ban PFAS in textiles, and that has led to the outdoor industry, for example, is out of PFAS as of the beginning of this year. So PFAS is out of food packaging, cosmetics, and textiles. So this is a positive step, and it's really being recognized. A lot of states, led by Maine, Minnesota, are banning unessential uses of PFAS in products. So if you want to know more about PFAS, we have a website called PFAS Central, where we report every week. We change it, the most important PFAS news stories, scientific articles we translate into a understandable sentence, PFAS policy, jobs, everything PFAS, and most important and most read page is our PFAS-free products page. Communities that had been drinking PFAS water for years asked us to please list products that do not contain any PFAS. And we're hoping that soon, so this is our most read page. Many, many people go here to find PFAS-free products. And we're hoping that in the future, it won't be necessary because, for example, all cosmetics will not have PFAS, and so we won't need the page. Okay, the last quick slide is we're working now on the issue of the connection between carbon, plastics, and chemicals. And as we're using less carbon for fuel, more is being used to make plastic and toxic chemicals. And so it's the petrochemical industry that's really, unfortunately, this leads to climate change, plastic pollution, and these toxic chemicals. And we think there's a way that all three of them need to be worked on together. So anyway, this is an op-ed we published in the New York Times, and it's a really, well, this was back in 2021, and we certainly haven't solved the problem, but we continue to work on it. So if you want to learn more, you can go to our websites, greensciencepolicy.org, pfascentral.org for more about PFAS, sixclasses.org for the 4-minute videos. I think if you take a picture of that, you will go to one of our websites, and I encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter where we talk about what's happening in the world of toxic chemicals and optimistic messages on how you can change things. I work really hard every month on this newsletter, and I hope some of you will sign up. Oh, I bet that takes you to our newsletter. But if you go to any of our websites, you get a chance. So I hope you will sign up for our newsletter. And with that, I think I'm not too much over time, and be happy to answer any questions. So I'm going to now attempt to stop showing my screen. Did it work? Did I stop showing my screen? Oh, good.
Thank you so much for really, again, such an informative presentation. And specifically, I want to thank you for really also providing us a little bit of the historical context around the use of specific chemicals, and then manufacturers saying, oh, but well, we'll substitute, but that chemical, so moving towards the idea of classifications of chemicals, because obviously when policy was specific, then we were seeing that chemical substitution that may not have been tested to be determined whether or not it had the same chemical impact. And I think that that's really important. For my first question that I want to ask you, which is about, your work. I mean, you've had an incredible career really working on the reduction of cancer-causing flame retardants, as well as now PFAS and consumer products. As you were working through that process, what were the biggest challenges and how did you overcome them?
Well, they were different each time. A universal challenge, unfortunately, is that the producers of the chemicals want to keep selling them. And they are petrochemicals. And that's why we started thinking about the connection to climate and plastics. So that's always a problem. For flame retardants, it's the idea that you have to have flame retardants because they're going to stop fires, even if they're so harmful. That's what everyone said. But then we learned that if the flammability standards weren't good, like that standard for furniture didn't actually, we all got these toxic penta and tris on our bodies, and there was no fire safety benefit because it was a bad standard. And so getting people to think about the standard was a big challenge. But the flame retardant industry was really challenging. For antimicrobials, I think the big challenge is people think they're a good thing, especially since the pandemic. And on TV, I don't actually watch TV, but I'm told there's all these advertisements about killing germs, like this is a good thing. But actually, it's good to have. Fortunately, many years ago, a professor of biochemistry said to me, you want to have bacteria on your hands. Don't use antimicrobial soaps. 20 years ago, he said that to me. And I believed that and heard it. But that is not advertised on TV. You don't make money from not selling them. But, we hope these brands, we're really hoping that these brands which make good products will recognize that they could have their good products. Like the Dawn thing to me was, when I saw that at the aisle at Safeway, oh my gosh, this is amazing. That they will recognize that just the way the carpet industry recognized that they were not benefiting from adding the PFAS and they could stop. And so our hope is that some of these producers will recognize. Anyway, I've gotten off into what we're doing. But, and a big problem with PFAS is they're actually very useful. It is PFAS are useful. I think the flame retardants and the antimicrobials aren't, but they're marketed, they're profitable. And so for PFAS, you have to find solutions. But given the harm, solutions can be found. I know I'm really involved with the outdoor industry, and starting in 2013, I wanted to do a talk for them about the harm of PFAS and moving away from it. They would not talk to me because they believed they needed it for functional gear. And then when California in 2022 passed legislation saying no PFAS in textiles, they immediately talked to me, and we talked about alternatives, and the law was effective January 1st of this year, and the outdoor industry has all found alternatives, and our outdoor gear is perfectly fine. So that usefulness, no, but people don't want to change. If they have something that works, they don't want to change. So that's the problem with PFAS, but there are alternatives, and it requires regulation, usually.
So we had a couple of questions that have come in, and both of I'm going to combine questions by Justin Lane and Denise Snyder, because they both bring up you've mentioned many classes of compounds, but also products, different products that contain chemicals that the consumer may not even be aware are harmful to their health. One area Justin brings up is pet products, and the idea that there is lead found in tennis balls and the use of phthalates in chew toys. And it's something that obviously dear to my heart as an animal lover, and I know that you also are an animal lover. And then Denise brought up about fragrances, that the consumer buys based on what they like and may not be aware of the harmful chemicals that are in fragrant containing compounds. Are those compounds that you're also considering as part of products, I should say, that you're also considering as part of your policy studies?
Well, you can't do everything. And so we're really focused on organohalogens because, as I said, they're not natural to any of our biochemistry. And like 2/3 of the harmful chemicals are organohalogens. It's not all of them. And there's certainly organohalogens in pet products. You know, we found flame retardants in dog beds. The phthalates are in pet chew toys, but they are in baby chew toys also. So I think most lead is in pet. So I think pets, it's the same as us. They're you know, any mammal is harmed by these organohalogens. So you know, that is kind of our window, is organohalogens. Fragrances definitely can be harmful, but we're specifically not, you know, we can really, we're very small and we can only work on so many things. But and there certainly are others, you know, we're not working on that are harmful. But if we can make headway on halogens, which, or at least the 6 classes people have said are like, you know, 2/3, 3/4 of the harmful chemicals in everyday products, the world could be healthier. And I think that most of the uses of these chemicals really aren't necessary given the potential for harm. So that's the question. Do we need this chemical given the potential for harm? And the answer for fragrances, for the pet products, it's usually no. But the manufacturers of the chemicals want to keep selling their chemicals.
And Wendy Reveridge, one of our listeners, talked about the impact to indoor air quality when we're using multiple products or even a single product fragrance profile that could be impacting our indoor air quality. So thank you for that. So you're working on some new things. You're always working. And what are the greatest obstacles for your current work to reduce exposure to harmful chemicals? And also for those of us who are consumers, right? What is it we could be doing that would be most helpful in your work around reducing these harmful chemicals in everyday products?
Well, I do think antimicrobials are the new place that we can really have impact, and it's up to consumers. And it's not recognized since the pandemic. You know, everybody got the idea we need to kill germs. And the reality is most bacteria are useful. We want them around. Things that, quote, kill germs probably are not good for our health or the health of our planet. And so, you know, a doctor going into surgery would want to kill the germs on their hands, but somebody in their home, it's good to have bacteria on your hands. So I think recognizing that bacteria are fine, you know, and you know, we have always worked with decision makers, not with the public. But I think the problem is that the public wants antibacterials, and so they're getting them, even though the reality is, as I said, they're harmful to health and contribute to antibacterial resistance. I didn't say that, but there's concerns that antibiotic resistance may be the kill more people than cancer by 2050. It's really increasing. And so the overuse of antibiotics in animal feed in animals is one area, but the overuse of antibacterials in all these products contributes to antibiotic resistance. So I think recognizing that is really important. You know, and they're on our website yet, but if anybody writes me, gyms are a good example. Like when you go to a gym, you spray, there are all these spray bottles around that you're supposed to spray and wipe the equipment before and after. Well, those spray bottles contain quaternary ammonium compounds, which actually many of them, to work, you have to leave them on wet for 5 minutes or something, but nobody does. You know, they spray them, they wipe their towel on their forehead, they get exposed. And they're unnecessary. You know, if you really wanted your equipment wiped down with those, it should be done properly by gym personnel when there's nobody there. People should not be exposed. They're being used improperly, but in gyms all over the country. So we do have a sheet, and it's not very successful to try to get gyms to stop. So that we're trying that. If anybody wants our sheet, please write me. And I think you can just Google me and you'll reach me. So we'd appreciate people's help with if they're gyms or other, yoga studios, many places you're spraying things and you look and they're quaternary ammonium compounds. They're those very compounds that are in soap. So I think just being aware that you don't want these things and maybe telling others, which is a little hard to do, but that would be great. So small suggestion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blum. Really, I love when you come to do webinars for MBCC. You provide us with such incredible insight into the work and into the work of developing policy. Unfortunately, that is all we have for today in terms of response to questions, but I do want to indicate to those we didn't get to that you can reach Dr. Blum through her website, arleneblum.com. And ask your questions there as well. On behalf of myself and the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition Board and Cheryl Osimo, MBCC's Executive Director, I want to thank you, Dr. Blum, for this very informative discussion today. And I want to thank all of our many listeners for joining us. For those interested, the recording of this webinar will be made available later today on the MBCC website at mbcc.org. And if you would like to further support our mission of preventing environmental causes of breast cancer, please consider making a donation by visiting mbcc.org/donate. I appreciate your consideration. Have a great afternoon. And again, thank you, Dr. Blum.
The privilege. Thank you. And I appreciate supporting your excellent work.